You have a version of your life that lives entirely in your head. It is detailed, it is vivid. You can feel it when you close your eyes late at night. The work you would do, the person you would become, the life that is waiting somewhere just past the point where you finally start. You have thought about it more than most people think about anything. You have planned it, refined it, returned to it 1,000 times, and you have not started. Not really, not in any way that counts. And the most confusing part is not that you are lazy. You know you are not lazy. You work, you function, you move through the world. But when it comes to the thing that matters most, the thing you actually want, something stops every single time. And you have never been able to name what that something is. What stops is not ambition. You have more ambition than most people will ever feel. What stops is not intelligence or vision or the capacity to imagine something better. What stops is something older and quieter and far more specifically located than any of those things. And it has been running silently beneath every plan you have ever made and every start you have never quite begun. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying why some people move toward challenge and others avoid it, even when they desperately want what is on the other side. And what she found was not about effort or talent or discipline. It was about what a person believes will be revealed if they try and fail. The person who dreams big but does nothing has almost always organized their identity around their potential, around what they could do, around the possibility of what they might become. And potential is the safest place a human identity can live, because potential has never been tested. Potential has never failed. Potential is always, by definition, still possible. The moment you begin, the moment the dream moves from inside your head to out in the world where other people can see it and measure it and find it wanting, the protection disappears. And what is left is not just a failed project, it is a failed self. This is what psychology calls self-handicapping, a concept documented by Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones in the late 1970s that has since been confirmed across decades of research. Self-handicapping is the unconscious creation of obstacles that explain failure in advance. You do not begin because beginning would force the question you're most afraid to answer. The question is not whether the dream is good. The question is whether you are. And as long as you never begin, you never have to find out. The procrastination is not laziness, it is armor. Sophisticated, exhausting, self-defeating armor, but armor nonetheless. There is something else living inside this pattern that runs deeper than self-protection. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on self-regulation showed that the capacity for sustained action toward a goal is not primarily a function of motivation, it is a function of identity. People do not consistently do what they want to do, they consistently do what they believe they are. The person who exercises every day does not decide each morning whether they feel like exercising. They are someone who exercises. The decision was made at the level of identity, and everything after that is simply behavior following belief. The person who dreams big but does nothing has not made that identity shift. They are someone who wants to write the book, not someone who writes. They are someone who plans to start the business, not someone who builds. And the gap between wanting and being is not crossed by more planning or more motivation or more vision. It is crossed by a single act, repeated often enough that the identity begins to change around it. But understanding this does not make it easier, because there is something that blocks even the smallest beginning. And it is not fear of failure in the abstract. It is something Baumeister identified in his research on self-regulation, the finding that self-regulation draws from a finite pool of mental and emotional energy. Every day, the person with a big dream also carries something else. They carry the weight of the gap between who they are and who they believe they should be. That gap is not neutral, it is heavy. Psychologist Tory Higgins described this as the ought-actual self-discrepancy, the chronic agitation of living at a distance from the self you believe you are supposed to be. and chronic agitation depletes the same system that produces action. By the time the person who dreams big sits down to begin, they have already spent the day being quietly exhausted by the distance between what is and what should be. They do not begin because there is nothing left, not because they don't care, because caring this much for this long without acting is one of the most draining things a human being can do to themselves. And then there is the dream itself, because the dream has become something that cannot afford to be ordinary. Every year that passes without beginning, the dream grows in the telling. It becomes more specific, more detailed, more inevitable, more magnificent. It becomes the explanation for everything that is missing in the correct life. If I was doing that, everything would be different. If I had started then, I would be there by now. The dream stops being a goal and becomes a mythology. And you cannot start a mythology. You can only start a project. A small, imperfect, embarrassing first attempt at something that looks nothing like the version in your head. And the version in your head has become so refined and so complete and so far from what a beginning actually looks like that starting feels like betraying the only thing that has kept you going. Psychologist Albert Bandura spent his career studying what he called self-efficacy, the belief in your own capacity to produce a specific result through action. And what he found is that self-efficacy is not built by thinking or planning or imagining success. It is built almost exclusively through what he called mastery experiences, small wins, completed attempts, evidence accumulated over time that you are capable of doing the thing. The person who has been dreaming for years without beginning has zero mastery experiences in the domain that matters most to them, not because they are incapable, but because they have been protecting themselves from the only experience that would actually help them. Every year without beginning is another year without evidence, and without evidence, the fear grows, and as the fear grows, the dream gets bigger to match it, and as the dream gets bigger, the beginning feels more impossible. The loop tightens around itself and calls the tightening caution. Here's the honest truth that sits at the bottom of all this. The life in your head is not the life that is waiting for you. It was never going to be. The life that is actually available to you, the one that gets built through imperfect starts and failed attempts and a slow accumulation of evidence that you can do this, that life is harder and stranger and less magnificent than the version in your head. And real is the only thing that actually counts. The person you were planning to become once everything was in place has been waiting for a beginning that never was going to feel ready, because nothing about beginning feels ready. Beginning feels like jumping into something you can't see the bottom of. And the gap between the dream and the start is not closed by more thinking. It is closed by the one thing that thinking was always designed to help you avoid: moving. Not perfectly, not confidently, not when everything is aligned, just moving. Into the uncertainty, into the ordinary, embarrassing, imperfect reality of someone who has finally decided that the version in their head is not worth more than the life they could actually be living. That's not a comfortable truth, but it is the only one that has ever changed anything.